Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a place that's both disturbingly ordinary and deeply terrifying, the polished corridors and shadowed corners of Nazi Germany's most powerful spaces. You won't be charging onto a battlefield tonight or sneaking through spy networks. Nope. You'll be sipping coffee in embroidered dining rooms, tying children's shoelaces, and casually listening to the radio while the world burns outside your window. Because tonight, you're going to meet the women of the Nazi elite, not just the famous faces, but the quiet wives, loyal mistresses, and smiling secretaries who helped the machine turn. You'll see loyalty dressed in lace, ambition behind soft smiles, and a kind of evil that doesn't shout, it whispers from the living room. Oh, and you probably won't survive this ethically, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Berlin. 1943. Not in rubble. Not yet. You're inside the Reich Chancellery. That stark monument of stone and power where decisions are made and destinies sealed. The air smells like furniture polish and burnt cigars. Men walk with urgency here, but look closer. Women glide through the same hallways. Silk dresses brushing against marble floors. Voices soft but full of influence. These aren't bystanders. You watch one woman hand a folded note to an officer, her husband. A shopping list. No, a message routed from Himmler's desk. Another leans in to whisper something to her lover, something small that might change everything for someone far away. It's a chilling thing to witness. Power cloaked in domesticity. The Nazi regime had a gendered division of labor. Sure, men gave speeches. Women gave airs. But that's only the surface story. As you sink deeper into this world, you realize the Reich wasn't powered by testosterone alone. Its gears turned on softer hands too. You overhear Goebbels' wife, Magda, discussing which of her 6 children looked most like their Führer. Not in a creepy way, just proud. That's the creepy part. Historians still argue whether these women had any real power. After all, they didn't sign the orders or sit in the war rooms. But then again, the men who did those things often went home to them, kissed them, confided in them, leaned on them. Who holds the leash when the beast lies down to sleep? One mainstream fact most people know. Women were key to Hitler's vision of the future. Their wombs were considered national assets. The Lebensborn program offered support to racially pure mothers unmarried. No problem, as long as the child was Aryan. You might think you've wandered into a dystopian sci-fi episode, but nope. This was government policy. Now picture this. A group of Nazi wives sipping wine in a lush garden while their children play nearby. The city around them hums with military processions. Someone cracks a joke about Goebbels' latest tantrum. The afternoon sunlight glints off polished boots resting on Persian rugs. One woman picks up a baby, wipes its chin, and asks if anyone else saw the new shipment of silverware from Paris. Here's your fringe fact for tonight. The wives of top Nazi officials were allowed to shop through homes confiscated from deported Jewish families down to the bedsheets and teacups. Imagine thumbing through a dead family's furniture catalog over schnapps. So where do you come in? You're watching all of this from the corner of the room, a ghost of the future. You see what they refuse to see or won't admit they see. That evil doesn't always arrive with blood on its hands. Sometimes it's wearing heels and a brooch. You follow a secretary down a corridor. Her name is Annalisa. She's 22, bright-eyed, with impeccable shorthand. She jokes that she types faster when listening to Wagner. Her job: transcribing logistics for Operation Reinhard, the deadliest phase of the Holocaust. Annalisa hums while she works. It's the small details that sink into your bones. The quiet shuffling of paper. The cinnamon scent of afternoon cake. The lipstick left on teacups while death orders are sealed in envelopes. You pause beside a coat rack. Fur wraps, military caps, a child's drawing pinned to a corkboard. Nothing here screams horror. That's what makes it worse. As you drift toward the evening, the chancellery grows dimmer. A woman switches on a lamp shaped like a swan outside. The city carries on citizens hurrying through curfews, lights flickering out in Jewish homes soon to be emptied. You realize something. This wasn't just a war of armies. It was a war of dinner tables, bed linens, lullabies sung beside radio broadcasts. And the women, they weren't just there. They were part of the architecture. Some built it with smiles. Some just never looked away. Remember that secretary humming Wagner? You'll meet her again. And her silence will echo. You step carefully now, your feet crunching over the broken glass of history's illusions, until you arrive at a quiet, candlelit space in the Führer bunker. It's warm in here eerily so, like the air itself refuses to acknowledge the end of the world just above. You find her seated at a vanity, gently brushing the hair of her youngest daughter. Her name is Magda Goebbels. You've probably heard of her, or at least of what she did. 6 children, all blonde, all blue-eyed, dressed in matching nightgowns, arranged neatly in a row. One by one, she drugged them, whispered comfort, and placed a cyanide capsule between their teeth. All because a world without National Socialism wasn't a world worth living in, not for her, and not for them. But rewind a little. Let's not jump straight to the poison. Magda's story begins with pearls and idealism. She's born into privilege, and for a brief moment, she even dates a young Jewish man, Viktor Alazarov, future Zionist leader. Imagine that. History zigged, and she zagged. One breakup later, she marries Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda wizard himself. He's ambitious, insecure, and famously unfaithful. She knows, she stays. And so, you live with her in their lavish Berlin apartment, surrounded by art looted from across Europe, listening to Joseph rehearse speeches about purity while cheating with actresses on the side. Magda smiles for the cameras. She bakes. She hosts Hitler for lunch. She mothers 6 children with eerie discipline, raising them to believe in a world where their blood makes them better. Mainstream fact time. Magda wasn't just a wife of, she was dubbed the First Lady of the Reich, especially after Hitler refused to marry Eva Braun in public. She traveled with Hitler, attended state events, and acted as the matronly face of the Nazi ideal beauty. Devotion? Fertility? Now here's your quirky tidbit. She once gifted Hitler a portrait of her children for his birthday, signed it, "From your little ones." That's not just flattery, that's religious fervor. Still, historians still argue whether Magda's act killing her children was one of agency or desperation. Did she make the choice freely? Was it loyalty or fear? One theory claims she tried to smuggle them out. Another says she refused help from the Red Cross. The truth curls like smoke in that bunker air. Back to you. Sitting in the corner while she laces her daughter's nightgowns. The war is lost. The walls shake from Soviet artillery. Upstairs, soldiers debate who gets the last bottle of brandy. But in here, Magda's movements are careful, graceful. She brushes lint from her son's shoulder. She sighs like it's just another bedtime routine. The children trust her. Of course. Why wouldn't they? She's always been there, with stories and honeyed milk. So when she says, "Take this, it will help you sleep," they believe her. You want to scream, but you can't. You just watch later. She and Joseph take their own lives. Cyanide and pistol, curtains closed, a crumpled photo of Hitler on the floor beside them, and here's what lingers. The way she smiled in photographs, the softness in her voice during radio broadcasts, the elegance of her handwriting on birthday cards. This was no monster in a mask. She was a mother, educated, cultured, and entirely convinced that her world was worth preserving at any cost. In post-war documentaries, you hear people say, "She must have been brainwashed," or "She was just following her husband." But you're here now. You saw the way she looked at her children that night. Not panicked, not uncertain. Devout. The moral weight sits on your chest like damp wool. Is motherhood still sacred when it becomes political? Is love real if it kills to prove a point? The questions turn in your mind like gears that no longer fit. Later, when Allied forces find the bunker, they see the children first. Peaceful, too peaceful. One officer vomits. Another cries, but the world moves on. Trials begin. Names are remembered. Others are erased. But Magda remains infamous. You walk away from that dark room and back into history's bloodstream. There's no comfort here, but there is clarity. Magda Goebbels was not dragged to her fate. She walked toward it, dragging 6 children by the hand. You tiptoe now into quieter shadows, up a staircase tucked behind a curtain, through a door that leads not to policy or strategy, but to something far more personal, a girl's dream. This is where you find Eva Braun, curled up on a sofa with a stack of fashion magazines, a Leica camera by her side, and a smile that barely hints at the man in the next room. Eva is no political operative. She doesn't draft orders or hold rallies. She twirls to jazz records and sunbathes on the Berghof terrace, bronzing under alpine skies while war maps cover the walls inside. Still, she's no innocent. You watch as she edits home videos, yes, home videos of Hitler feeding his dog or walking with Goebbels. She adds soft transitions, arranges reels by mood. The Führer through Eva's lens looks normal, charming. Even, that's the trick. Eva doesn't stage the war, but she polishes the mask. Most people picture her as the shadowy mistress, a kept woman hidden away to preserve Hitler's bachelor image, and that's mostly true. She rarely appears in official photos. At state dinners, she's absent. When guests visit, she exits the room. But at night, behind heavy doors, her voice is the one he hears. Mainstream fact. For over a decade, she remained Hitler's closest companion. Not Goering, not Himmler Eva. She dined with him daily, watched his moods shift with battlefield losses, and once attempted suicide to get his attention. It worked. Here's your fringe tidbit. Hitler gave her a handgun as a gift. Romantic. Not really, but practical. In a Nazi kind of way. He also gifted her cyanide capsules, yes, plural. You know, just in case she misplaced one. Historians still argue whether Eva knew the full extent of Hitler's crimes. Surely, she heard whispers. She read the newspapers. She walked the Berghof halls. Some say she was apolitical, disinterested in policy. Others point to her closeness, her selective silences, and her chosen presence at the end, 'cause you're with her now in that final bunker, the same one Magda Goebbels left behind. The walls feel thinner here. The air tastes like dust and iron. Eva sits beside Hitler, calm, loyal to the bitterest end. No makeup, no fanfare, just a cyanide capsule clutched in her palm like a wedding ring. They had finally married the night before. She wore a pale dress. He signed the license with a shaky hand. Less than 40 hours later, they're both dead, she from poison, he from both poison and a gunshot. You watch the bodyguards wrap their corpses in blankets, carry them upstairs, and burn them in the garden. It doesn't feel real, but it is. Eva's legacy is murky. She was no ideologue. She didn't give speeches or scream about Jewish conspiracies, but she also never walked away. Not once. She lived in luxury during a time of starvation. She laughed beside the architect of genocide, and she chose to die with him. You think about modern stories, those documentaries and dramatic recreations that paint her as naive or trapped, but you were just there. You saw her lean into that final kiss, not weeping, not begging. Bislut. There's something haunting about her banality. She loved fashion, took selfies before they were cool, smoked secretly, liked champagne. She even argued about whether Hitler's dog should be allowed on the couch. Ordinary quirks, ordinary tastes. In the most extraordinary evil imaginable, you pull back now, drifting out of that suffocating underground maze. The walls still hum with power. Even after the lights have gone out, Ava's perfume lingers in the curtains. Her laughter, too. The kind of sound that makes you wonder how close love and delusion really are, somewhere above ground. The world will remember her as Hitler's mistress, just that, a footnote. But you know better now. You watched her stay, you watched her choose. And sometimes, that's more damning than any speech or order. You slip into the rhythm of parades and lullabies now, drifting past tanks and into kitchens, where something stranger brews than just soup. You're not in a bunker anymore. You're in a modest Bavarian home with lace curtains and a framed portrait of Hitler above the mantelpiece, standard decor for the ideal Nazi family. Here, the clatter of dishes blends with marching songs on the radio, and the future of the Reich is quietly being shaped. This is the world of the Nazi housewife. The mother soldier in an apron. You sit at her table, feet tapping against the tiled floor. As she folds laundry with military precision, she isn't a background character. No, she's essential. To Hitler's vision, to Germany's population goals, and to a machine that runs not just on tanks but on birth rates. Mainstream fact, Nazi ideology placed women firmly in their roles of Kinder, Küche, Kirche children, kitchen, church, but don't mistake this as disempowerment. It was strategy. Women were told they were the bearers of the folk's future, guardians of racial purity. That's not passivity. That's conscription into domestic warfare. You flip through one of the regime's guidebooks for young breedies. It reads like a mix of etiquette manual and cult indoctrination. Marry young, breed often, never question. The perfect wife is quiet, fertile, and politically obedient. She doesn't read Freud, she reads Mein Kampf. There's even a medal for this. Literally, the Mother's Cross was awarded in bronze, silver, and gold depending on how many children you bore for the Reich. It came with privileges, social status, financial perks, and a handshake from the Führer if you were lucky. You can almost hear the propaganda posters whispering, your womb is your battlefield. You visit a Lebensborn maternity home now, nestled in a pine forest. Looks cozy, feels sinister. It's a state-run facility where racially pure women are encouraged, sometimes coerced, to birth the next generation of Aryans. The fathers, often anonymous SS officers, the children, taken if the mother fails to meet ideological standards. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some Lebensborn kids were kidnapped, especially in occupied territories like Poland. Thousands of blonde, blue-eyed children were forcibly taken from their families, Germanized, and placed with loyal Nazi foster homes. You're walking through one such house now. A boy plays with toy soldiers. He doesn't know his real name. Historians still argue whether women in these roles were brainwashed or complicit. Some insist they were victims of manipulation. Others point to letters, diaries, and testimonies showing pride fierce, chilling pride in their part of Hitler's racial empire. You notice a woman teaching her daughter how to sew a swastika patch onto a youth uniform. She explains the symbol like it's a family crest. Outside, boys and girls in the Hitler Youth and BDM League of German Girls march in neat rows, reciting slogans about loyalty and purity. It's not just the men. The next generation is being built like a skyscraper, brick by ideological brick. At a local festival, you watch young women perform folk dances, hand-woven dresses swishing in harmony. There's cake, music, flags. It feels like any other village celebration until the speeches start. They speak of soil, blood, and destiny, and the crowd claps like it's the gospel. Back in the kitchen, the housewife serves apple strudel. She smiles, proud of her children. They've learned their lessons well. She says she's not political, just doing her duty. But she doesn't question where her Jewish neighbors went, or why her husband's factory suddenly has new laborers who never leave. You feel it now. The weight of quiet collaboration, not through violence, but through belief, through comfort, through the seductive hum of normalcy. You pass a family photo on the wall. Everyone's smiling. It looks safe, but you know what's happening beyond the frame. And so you sit with this discomfort. Can someone be dangerous just by upholding an idea? Can loyalty itself be a weapon? When the bombs begin to fall, many of these women weep for their sons. They never considered themselves villains, just good Germans, good wives, good mothers. But you remember what you've seen, the medals, the indoctrination, the choices made quietly, daily. This wasn't a regime that merely tolerated women, it depended on them. You step outside into the twilight, the air laced with baking bread and distant air raid sirens. In this version of war, the battlefield is every home. And the soldiers, they're wearing aprons. You drift now to a quieter street, far from Berlin's grand avenues and palatial offices. The building you enter is playing no guards, no fanfare, just a modest home with ivy growing along the eaves. Inside, a woman named Ilse Hess is boiling water for tea. She moves gently, like someone used to silences, both chosen and imposed. She hums a little tune while setting the table for two. Her husband, Rudolf Hess, is not here. He's sitting in a British prison cell after his bizarre solo flight to Scotland in 1941, trying to negotiate peace behind Hitler's back. Historians still argue whether he was acting on Hitler's secret wishes or just freelancing on a dangerous whim. But you're here to understand the woman he left behind. Ilse met Rudolf back when the Nazi Party was still a beer hall movement. They married in 1927, young and full of fervor. She wasn't just a doting wife, she was politically engaged. She attended rallies. She encouraged Rudolph's work. She believed in the movement. You sit across from her now, watching her stir honey into his tea, even though he's not here to drink it. That's devotion. Or denial. Sometimes both. One mainstream fact. Ilse remained loyal to Rudolf and the Nazi cause long after the war. She never publicly denounced either. Even after his conviction at Nuremberg. Even after decades of isolation at Spandau prison. Her letters to him are filled with tenderness and ideology. It's like reading love notes wrapped around political pamphlets. But here's your quirky tidbit. After Rudolph's imprisonment, Ilse campaigned tirelessly for his release, even appealing to the United Nations. She published a book defending him and argued that he was a man of peace, misunderstood by history, which is quite a stretch, considering the whole deputy to Hitler part of his resume. Still, you sit with her as she folds his shirts, decades after his disappearance from public life. She tells stories about their early days, how he used to read astrology charts and believe fate had chosen him for greatness. She smiles as if remembering a dance, not a dictatorship. The moral fog thickens here. Ilse wasn't a killer. She didn't issue orders, but she adored someone who did, and she helped him rise. She maintained his legacy. She taught their son that he was a hero, not a war criminal. You visit the home's attic, where boxes of old Nazi newspapers and campaign pins gather dust. This isn't a museum. It's a shrine. The past isn't examined here, it's preserved. Carefully and lovingly, you run your fingers along the spines of old books. Every one of them whispers the same message. It wasn't our fault. Historians still argue how much Ilse truly knew. Was she shielded? Was she complicit? But perhaps the better question is, did she want to know? Or was the illusion too comforting to break? Because there's power in ignorance, not the bumbling kind, but the selective kind, the kind where you hear the rumors, but never ask for proof, where you see the smoke but refuse to call it fire. You convince yourself that love means belief, and belief means loyalty, even to something monstrous. At night, she lights a candle for Rudolph, not in grief, but in pride. She believes he stood for something noble, and that belief, more than any act of violence, is what chills you most. You walk through her garden, past rose bushes she planted when the war ended, each one named after someone she missed. Rudi, Germany, truth. The irony is suffocating. But the roses are beautiful. Evil doesn't always grow in thorns. You exit quietly, the screen door creaking behind you. Ilse returns to her tea, alone again but not defeated. She has rewritten her history, and perhaps that is the most dangerous power of all, the ability to edit memory like a photo album. Cropping out the horror and framing only the devotion. You tread carefully now, your steps muffled by the thick rugs of a home that feels like a fortress of silence. This is where you find Margret Himmler, wife of Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, architect of the Holocaust, man with icy eyes and warm tea preferences. You expect the air to feel heavier here, but it doesn't. Everything is tidy, peaceful, disturbingly so. Margret, or Marga, as her husband called her, moves with quiet precision. She's trained as a nurse, once dreamed of a small-town practice, but ended up married to one of the most powerful and feared men in Nazi Germany. You catch her organizing the family photo album, little Gudrun in pigtails, Heinrich in uniform, smiling beside his wife like any other proud dad. That's the trick, the illusion. This house could belong to any successful family, but peel back the wallpaper, and you'll find maps stained with ash. Mainstream fact, Marga was more than just the woman behind Himmler. She was a party member early on, running her own clinic and financially supporting Nazi initiatives before they were cool or terrifying. She didn't just marry the movement, she helped midwife it. Still, she's not often mentioned in history books, not because she did little, but because she did it quietly. She didn't speak at rallies, she didn't pose for propaganda posters, but she was there, always, endorsing her husband's vision through unwavering support, both moral and logistical. Quirky detail, Marga was an avid letter writer. She and Heinrich exchanged hundreds of letters, sweet, mundane, sometimes disturbingly detached from the horrors surrounding them. I hope you slept well, she'd write, while her husband visited death camps. How's Gudrun's cough? She'd ask. As trains rolled toward Auschwitz, you can't help but pause here. What kind of mental gymnastics does it take to nurture a child and a genocide at the same time? You peek into Marga's diary, an orderly world of shopping lists, medical notes, and casual references to SS events. Not once does she question. Historians still argue whether Marga truly knew the full scope of her husband's crimes. Some say she must have, others suggest she chose not to dig too deep. But you've read the letters. You've walked her halls. She knew enough. And what she didn't know, she didn't ask. You step into the living room. There's a tea tray on the table. Gudrun's homework sprawled out beside it. A globe near the window shows Europe with all the new lines drawn in. Marga believed in order, in discipline, in a racially clean Germany. She called it health. The world called it genocide. She wasn't invited into her husband's darker operations, but she supported his worldview without question. You sit with her on the sofa as she knits a scarf for a wounded SS officer. She says it's patriotic. She doesn't mention the origin of the wool, or the hands that packed it. And here's what stings. After the war, Marga was detained, interrogated, and eventually released. No charges, no trial. She faded into a quiet post-war life, raising Gudrun and avoiding eye contact with history. The Himmler name lived on through Gudrun, who idolized her father until the day she died. But that's a story for another evening. For now, you're with Marga, who, even in old age, never expressed public remorse. Her silence became her defense. You glance at the bookshelf volumes of German poetry, homeopathy manuals, a photo album from SS family outings. It's jarring. You expected monster masks. What you find is normalcy weaponized, domesticity used as camouflage. Marga didn't drive the train. She didn't write the orders, but she kept the engine warm, the uniforms pressed, and the ideology alive at the dinner table. You step out into the garden. Gudrun swings swaying in the breeze. A bird sings. The sun filters through apple blossoms. For a moment, it feels like peace. But you know what this garden overlooks? You know who lives in the house. And you know, now that Complicity often wears a cardigan, You find yourself now in a different kind of office, not the smoky war rooms of Berlin, but a clean, efficient space with clacking typewriters, inkwells, and potted plants watered every Wednesday. This is the domain of the female secretaries, the unsung bureaucrats of genocide. They file memos, take dictation, and organize meetings where horrors are plotted over coffee. You walk behind one now. Her name is Gerda, and she's 21. She wears a crisp blouse, neat skirt, and carries a leather-bound notebook. Her heels click across polished parquet floors as she heads into a room where Eichmann is discussing transport logistics. That's code. Of course, you know that, but Gerda, she writes it down without a blink. Mainstream fact, thousands of women worked in the Nazi bureaucracy, secretaries, stenographers, typists. The Reich didn't run on bullets alone. It ran on carbon copies, schedules, and meeting minutes. The final solution wasn't just conceived, it was typed, distributed, indexed. But here's your fringe tidbit. Many of these women later claimed they had no idea what they were helping to organize. One infamous example, Brunhilde Pomsel, Joseph Goebbels' secretary, who lived to be 106. She insisted she knew nothing of the Holocaust until after the war. Nothing, despite being inches from the propaganda machine that sold it to the nation. Historians still argue whether these women were truly in the dark or simply chose not to turn on the light. You sit beside Gerda now as she files today's minutes. Train departures, special resettlements, revised food allotments for labor camps. She bites her lip over a typo, not over the meaning behind it. You scan her desk, a photo of her dachshund, a recipe for apple cake, a small swastika flag in a pencil holder. There's no blood here, just bureaucracy. The killing machine ran smoother when it looked this ordinary. You follow her to lunch. She chats with colleagues about fashion and cinema, the rising cost of nylons, and which officer she thinks is cute. Someone makes a joke about a prisoner shipment being delayed. They laugh. The soup is good today. Back in the office, she opens a letter from a commander in Poland. It's a request for additional rail transports. She stamps it with approval and moves on to the next. You want to ask her, do you know what you just did? But she's already humming and looking for her fountain pen. That's what disturbs you most. The casualness, the lack of overt malice. Evil here isn't theatrical. It's tidy, well organized, and disturbingly banal. One woman you meet, Anneliese, used to record victim names for deportation manifests. Later, she married a banker and told her children she worked in logistics. They only found out the truth after her death, when they discovered hundreds of memos in the attic. Names, destinations, erased lives cataloged like luggage. You walk through the registry rooms now, where rows of metal cabinets hold names of entire families sent to their deaths, typed in triplicate, one for the transport officer, one for central records, one for, well, that part was often destroyed later. The women didn't build the camps, but they made them function. They enabled the scale. It's one thing to swing a rifle, it's another to schedule the train that carries 1,000 souls to their final stop. You listen to one secretary talk about her job during a post-war interview. It was very stressful. You know, so many documents, so many deadlines. She speaks like a corporate intern, not someone who typed orders for a genocide. The post-war world treated many of these women lightly. Few were prosecuted, some married, some vanished. Many reinvented themselves as harmless grandmothers. You've probably walked past one once, in a supermarket, wondering if she looked familiar. But you remember their names now. Their desks, their typewriters, their tidy stacks of paper that amounted to millions of dead. You back out of the office slowly. Someone offers you coffee, you decline. And you wonder, does pushing the button matter less if you didn't invent the machine? Or is being the oil in the gears just as damning? You slip quietly now into a dimly lit apartment, the air thick with secrecy and perfume. There's a crackle of a phonograph in the corner, soft jazz, muffled by closed curtains. A baby cries in the next room, and seated on a cushioned chair, writing something in looping script, is Hedwig Podest, mistress to one of the most dangerous men in Nazi Germany, Heinrich Himmler. This is not a palace. It's not the kind of place where evil wears a uniform. It's a second home, a secret home, and in it, Hedwig raises the 2 children Himmler fathered with her quietly, privately, while his official wife, Margarete, tends to their legitimate family elsewhere. You're in the hidden wings of power now, where love, ambition, and ideology get tangled in unsettling ways. Mainstream fact, Himmler, for all his public image of discipline and Aryan virtue, carried on a long-term relationship with Hedwig while orchestrating the Holocaust. Their affair was no fleeting thing, it lasted for years. He arranged jobs and residences for her, He visited often. Their relationship was described by some SS colleagues as more affectionate than his marriage, but the fringe detail. He reportedly used code names when writing to her like Uncle Heinrich, especially when referring to the children. The secrecy wasn't just about shame, it was about image management, even inside a regime obsessed with controlling every detail of public and private life. You sit with Hedwig now as she stitches a name into a child's jumper. She looks calm, focused. There's no malice in her eyes, but you can't ignore the weight of the silence that fills this home. No one says what her partner does for a living. No one talks about where he is during those long absences, but she knows. Of course she knows. Historians still argue whether Hedwig was fully aware of Himmler's crimes. She wasn't part of official SS operations. She didn't attend high-level meetings. But you know how secrets work? They don't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. When the man you love disappears for days at a time and never speaks of the East, you feel it anyway in your gut, in the cold way he holds you, in the excuses that never need explaining. And yet, she stayed. She bore him children. She hosted dinners for SS wives. She walked through the Reich with her head held high, never legally recognized but never cast out either. That's power. Not the kind that writes laws, but the kind that enables men who do. You thumb through one of her letters. She talks about recipes, war rations, her son's handwriting, nothing about Treblinka, nothing about mass graves. That's the haunting part, the void, the gaping absence where accountability should live. You try to piece together her role. She wasn't an officer. She didn't type orders. But she gave comfort to a man who killed millions. She gave him an escape, a tender world to retreat into when his boots were caked in ash. The post-war years offer no clarity. Hedwig vanished into obscurity. She lived under a new name, rarely spoke publicly. Her children, born into shadows, grew up with unanswered questions and rewritten histories. There's a photo of her holding one of them, sunlight in her hair. You could mistake her for anyone, a war widow, a nurse, a school teacher, but now you know better. You've seen the apartment, heard the name on the letters, smelled the ink on secrets never confessed. So here's the question that stirs as you leave her room. Does love absolve you of responsibility or deepen it? If you love someone who destroyed lives and you helped him hide, did you not pick up the shovel yourself? Outside. The street is quiet. No one whispers her name anymore. But the echo is there, if you listen closely. And in that echo, you hear not just guilt but choice. You find yourself now in a schoolyard, not a bombed-out ruin, but one buzzing with laughter, pigtails, and marching songs. Welcome to the world of the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls. It's here, among braids and braided ideology, that the Nazi dream plants its seeds. You sit cross-legged in the grass beside a group of girls sewing armbands, their voices rising in perfect chorus. Blut und Boden, Heim und Herd, blood and soil, hearth and home. At first glance, it's innocent. The girls learn hygiene, cooking, first aid. They go camping, hike the hills, write journals. But look again, every lesson, every badge earned, every story told is laced with propaganda. They're not just being taught to grow up, they're being taught to serve their bodies, their minds, their futures, all a pre-assigned. Mainstream fact, by the mid-1930s, membership in the BDM was effectively mandatory for all Aryan girls over the age of 10, while boys in the Hitler Youth trained for war. Girls trained for motherhood, loyalty, and racial purity, their highest calling, producing future soldiers. Your fringe tidbit. The BDM even had a faith and beauty program for girls aged 17 to 21. On the surface, it focused on dance, fashion, and etiquette, but the real lesson was how to become the ideal Nazi wife. Graceful, obedient, fertile, and completely devoted to the Reich. Think of it as a finishing school run by a dictatorship. You sit through one of the BDM's lessons. A young instructor, barely older than her students, talks about the degeneration of non-Aryan blood. She points to charts, skips the science, relies on conviction. You glance at the girls, none blink. They nod. They believe. Later, around the campfire, they sing songs about German soil and Hitler's vision. It's cheerful, comforting, like a lullaby stitched with razor wire. And when one girl confides that her Jewish neighbor has disappeared, the others whisper that it's probably for the best. You feel the cold seep in beneath the warmth of their fire. Historians still argue how deep the indoctrination really went. Were these girls brainwashed? Or were they already reflecting what their homes, schools, and communities taught them? After all, they didn't start with hatred. They started with trust, and trust, in the wrong hands, becomes a powerful weapon. You meet one girl, Ingrid, who proudly displays her BDM pin, she tells you she hopes to marry an SS officer. She's memorized quotes from Mein Kampf. She can make strudel and recite Aryan ancestry guidelines. She's 12. There's a particular kind of sorrow in watching innocence weaponized. These girls weren't villains. Not then. But they weren't untouched either. You feel it as they cheer for speeches they don't understand, as they write letters to soldiers with stickers and press flowers, as they cry when Hitler dies, not because they comprehend geopolitics, but because they thought he was kind. You follow Ingrid home. Her mother greets her with a kiss. Her father nods proudly at her starched uniform. They all sit down to dinner, and no one mentions the deportations that happened 3 streets over. Silence. Here is a family value. The BDM was more than a club, it was a pipeline. Many of its members later married high-ranking Nazis. Some became SS wives. Some became guards in concentration camps. Some just raised children who carried the torch. The line between follower and enabler thins when belief hardens. You peek into Ingrid's diary. She writes about flowers, the seasons, the thrill of parading past cheering crowds. She writes that she hopes she'll be chosen to bear children for the Reich. She's been told it's an honor. The scariest part, it doesn't sound hateful. It sounds hopeful, as if she truly believes this is her purpose, that this is the light she should walk toward. You leave the schoolyard as the sun dips low, casting long shadows over short skirts and shiny boots. The marching continues, soft now, like the hum of history repeating itself. And you wonder, when a child is taught to hate with a smile, who bears the blame, the teacher, or the world that applauds? You walk now through winding garden paths and stone terraces draped in ivy, where war feels distant and everything smells of rose water and cigars. This is not a battlefield. It's a villa, one of many scattered across Germany and occupied lands estates where the mistresses of the Nazi elite lived, entertained, and whispered behind doors that never locked fully. You pass under a marble arch into a drawing room bathed in candlelight. The piano is freshly tuned, champagne chills in a silver bucket, and on the velvet chaise, a woman in pearls leafs through a guest list for this evening's party. Her name is Anneliese von D, and while her name won't appear in your textbook, her dinner parties help shape who lived, who died, and who profited. The Nazi leadership was never entirely uniform, not in ideology, and certainly not in its personal lives. Many high-ranking officials had affairs, unofficial partners, or second families, and with them came a coterie of women who held no title, but wielded intimate influence. Mainstream fact. Mistresses of Nazi officials were often given homes, staff, and privileges paid for with looted wealth art, furniture, and sometimes even entire apartments taken from deported Jewish families. Some mistresses accompanied their lovers to occupied territories, dining in villas while ghettos starved nearby. You follow Anneliese as she oversees the kitchen. Tonight's dinner includes venison, red wine, and a Viennese torte. Nothing about the menu suggests war, but the silverware engraved with a monogram once belonged to a Jewish couple who vanished 2 years ago. You recognize the name on the back of a teacup. So does she. She just doesn't care. Fringe tidbit. Some of these women helped coordinate deportation logistics under the guise of social events. One party held in Krakow in 1942 included SS officers, their partners, and several Reich bureaucrats. Over brandy and piano music, they discussed the acceleration of train schedules right between compliments on the canapes. You see how it worked. These weren't schemers twirling mustaches. They were socialites, secretaries, companions, women who blurred the line between ornament and operator. They whispered names, suggested transfers, rewarded loyalty with affection, punished disobedience with silence. Historians still argue over their intentions. Were they ideologues, opportunists, or just numb to the world outside their silk-curtained salons? But you've just watched Anneliese wink at a man who oversees confiscations in France. Her words are soft, but calculated. She tells him who's been unreliable lately. She means disloyal. Maybe Jewish, maybe both. She dabs her lipstick, checks her hair, and steps out to greet her guests. Laughter soon fills the villa. Toasts are made. Lives elsewhere unravel quietly. You wander upstairs. In the bedroom, there's a locked drawer. Inside, a necklace with a Hebrew inscription, a child's locket, a diary, none of them hers. You stare at these stolen remnants of someone else's life and wonder how often she opens this drawer, and why she never lets it go. One guest tonight brings news from the Eastern Front. Anneliese listens, expression unreadable. Tragic, she murmurs, stirring her wine. But necessary? Then she giggles at a joke about French resistance fighters. Her pearls clink against the glass like applause. This is what complicity looks like when it's bathed in candlelight. Not anger, not orders. Just 1,000 small nods that keep the machine humming. Later, when the Allies arrive, some of these women burn their love letters and hide their fur coats. They become war widows, secretaries, seamstresses. Most are never charged. After all, they didn't sign any documents. They just hosted the men who did. You return to the drawing room as the fire dies down. The guests have left. Annalisa stretches, barefoot now, humming to herself. She doesn't look evil. She looks content. Her life is safe, warm, unbothered. And yet the silence after she laughs, it stays with you longer than the laughter itself. So you ask yourself, when comfort depends on cruelty, can you ever claim ignorance? Or is the quiet at the villa more deafening than bombs? You step through creaking iron gates now, past thick hedges and rose bushes clipped with military precision. This estate once belonged to one of the coldest minds in Nazi Germany, Reinhard Heydrich, the butcher of Prague, the man who helped engineer the final solution. But he's not home tonight. He's dead. And in the widow's wing of the estate, Lena Heydrich sits with a cup of tea and a pension from the Reich. The house is too quiet now. You hear the ticking of a grandfather clock. The fireplace pops, and Lena, still dressed in mourning black, stares into the flames like they owe her something. Mainstream fact. Lena was instrumental in her husband's rise. She introduced Reinhard to Nazi circles, encouraged his SS ambitions, and cheered his promotions. Without her, he might have stayed a disgraced naval officer. With her, he became one of the most powerful and feared men in Europe. You drift back in time with her, watching their early years. A young couple, ambitious, elegant. She pushes him, challenges him. She believes in the cause more than he does at first. She's the true believer, the one who read the books, attended the meetings, and whispered about destiny when the world was still laughing at Hitler. Your quirky tidbit. After Reinhard's assassination in Prague in 1942, Hitler gave Lena a special pension higher than most war widows received. He told her Reinhard had died a martyr to the Reich. She wore that title like armor for the rest of her life. Historians still argue how much influence she had. Some suggest Reinhard's cruelty was intensified by her ambition. Others say he was destined for brutality either way. But it's clear, Lena wasn't dragged behind him. She walked beside him, sometimes ahead. You walk the hall with her now, admiring the portraits, family photos, Reinhard in uniform, their sons in lederhosen, a photo of Hitler holding one of the boys. The furniture is fine, much of it taken from confiscated Czech estates. She never gives them back. When the war ends, Lena is detained but not charged. She returns to this estate. She fights legal battles to keep her property, insisting it was earned, not stolen. She writes a memoir, portraying Reinhard as a noble patriot, not a genocidal planner. She refers to the Holocaust as a tragedy of misunderstandings. You close the book. The pages smell like ink and denial. She invites you to walk the garden. The roses are blooming. The statues stand untouched. From this distance, you can't hear the screams that once echoed through the streets of Prague. That's how she prefers it. Memory, here, is curated. She gestures to a bench, Reinhard's favorite. He liked to sit here after long days of planning executions and mass deportations. He had a sensitive soul, she says, pouring more tea. You don't answer. You peer into her scrapbook. Invitations to Nazi galas, letters of thanks from SS officials, awards Reinhard received for services to the Reich. She keeps them like sacred relics. In her mind, none of it was evil, just duty, just history misjudged. Even decades later, Lena never renounced her husband's legacy, never apologized. When asked in interviews about Jewish victims, she said they were caught in unfortunate times. Her grief was always for Reinhard, never for the millions his policies destroyed. So here she is, a widow in a black dress, sipping tea in a garden built on bones. You sit beside her. She offers you a pastry. You decline. And you realize evil doesn't always need to survive in loud voices. Sometimes it lingers in inheritance, in memory, in the soft sigh of a woman who thinks her husband died a hero. And you wonder if love justifies loyalty. Can it ever excuse silence? Or is silence just another form of permission? You glide now into a world stitched from velvet and gold, a world where politics are softened by powder puffs and power slips between silk gloves. You're in the Goering household, or more accurately, in the echoing halls of Hall, a palatial estate built by Hermann Göring himself. But tonight, your attention belongs to Emmy Goering. His wife, a former actress turned Nazi royalty. You can smell her perfume before you even see her something floral and faintly imperial. Emmy descends the staircase with a grace rehearsed on stage. her posture perfect, her expression serene. She doesn't just perform the role of the Nazi elite's leading lady, she is the performance. Mainstream fact. Emmy Goering was widely regarded as the first lady of the Third Reich before Magda Goebbels stepped into the spotlight. As the wife of the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, she was frequently seen at official functions, banquets, and grand parades. She was the glamorous face of a regime trying to appear civilized. But Emmy didn't just smile for the cameras. She worked the room, she charmed visiting dignitaries, she gave speeches to women's groups. She stood beside Goering in his ornate uniform, nodding supportively as he praised the Reich's destiny. She wasn't decorating the regime, she was selling it. Your quirky detail. Emmy once publicly scolded Eva Braun for acting too familiar around Hitler. She believed mistresses had no place in the public eye, and she saw herself as something far more important, a legitimizing symbol. Think Queen Consort with slightly more looted art. You watch her now as she supervises a team of house staff arranging flowers for tonight's event. The crystal is polished, the tapestries imported, and the chandeliers French, stolen. She knows it. You can see it in the way she lingers a second too long beneath them. Historians still argue whether Emmy truly grasped the depth of Goering's corruption and sadism, but how could she not? She visited occupied territories. She wore gowns paid for with stolen Jewish property. She lived in a house filled with confiscated masterpieces. When you sleep under ceilings ripped from burned-out mansions, you can't pretend it's just wallpaper. She and Goering hosted hunting parties, lavish dinners, and film screenings while the Reich disintegrated outside their gates. Meanwhile, Auschwitz expanded, Warsaw burned. But here at Karen Hall, the laughter never stopped until it did. You walk with Emmy through the long hall of mirrors Goering installed to reflect himself. Emmy pauses to adjust her brooch, catching your gaze in the glass. Germany was beautiful once, she says softly. We had dreams. She doesn't mention whose dreams were shattered to build hers. When the war ends, Emmy is arrested at the denazification trials. She claims ignorance. She says she was only a housewife, just an actress, never political, but the photographs say otherwise. So do the invitations, the receipts, the fan letters from Nazi supporters who saw her as a muse. She is sentenced to 1 year in prison, 12 months. That's it. When she is released, she returns to her daughter and a smaller life, never again appearing on stage, never again in silk ball gowns, but never expressing remorse. Either you sit with her now in a small post-war apartment. The furniture is modest, the makeup lighter, but the eyes still proud. She keeps a faded photo of Goering on the mantle. He's saluting. She's smiling. The old fur coats are gone. The jewelry sold. But in her voice, there's still a thread of belief, frayed but unbroken. You sip tea from a chipped cup that once belonged in a palace. She tells stories of her theater days, of the laughter, of the parties. She rarely mentions war, or Jews, or gas chambers. The past, for her, is a stage, and she was always the star. And you wonder, as you rise to leave, can a smile be an alibi? Or is charm, when wielded beside tyranny, just another uniform? You drift into a quieter world now. The war is over. The jackboots are silent. The swastika is painted over. The banners burned. But what happens to the women of the Reich after the curtain falls? Do they vanish into smoke like the bunkers? Or do they, like most people, simply keep going? You find yourself in a post-war village in Bavaria. The streets are clean. The baker knows everyone's name. And somewhere down the lane, a former Nazi wife is folding laundry. No one asks her questions anymore. This section of the story is about reinvention, about how many of the women who supported, served, or silently benefited from the Nazi regime simply resumed life after 1945. You sit in their kitchens, drink their weak coffee, and hear them refer to the war years only as those difficult times. Mainstream fact. The vast majority of Nazi-affiliated women were never prosecuted. Unlike the Nuremberg trials that targeted major male figures, there was no equivalent reckoning for the thousands of women who typed, nursed, mothered, or quietly conspired in their own ways. Many simply resumed ordinary lives teaching, nursing, baking, smiling. Your fringe tidbit. Some of these women even returned to government service. In the 1950s, West Germany quietly reinstated civil servants, including former Nazi party members, male and female. The clean slate approach extended beyond amnesty. It meant memory itself was blurred. You meet Elsa, once a typist for the SS, now an elementary school teacher. She hums lullabies to her students and tells them to be kind. There's a framed photo of her late husband on her desk. He died in Russia, she says. She doesn't say what he did there. You walk the aisles of a small grocery store where Irmgard, once a secretary at Auschwitz, now weighs potatoes and flirts with the postman. She was sentenced to just 2 years. She says she barely knew what was happening. Another woman, Therese, used to arrange travel for Nazi officers. Now she organizes charity dinners. She smiles often. She has grandkids. Her neighbors say she's a very good woman, and maybe she is now. Historians still argue whether post-war Germany wanted to remember. The early years were marked by economic hardship, shame, and silence. The past was locked away, sometimes literally in drawers, attics, and buried file cabinets. But you know better. You've seen what lies beneath lace tablecloths and family photo albums. You flip through a stack of wedding pictures. Everyone's smiling. A former SS officer dances with his bride. A Nazi widow marries a banker. People toast, kiss, clap. They are rebuilding, but what are they rebuilding on top of? In the town square, a statue commemorates the fallen. Not the victims, just the soldiers. The plaque reads, "For those who gave all." No mention of who took it all away. You ride a train beside a woman reading a novel. She's wearing a brooch shaped like an Edelweiss. You recognize her from a photo. She once hosted deportation officers for dinner. Now she's a grandmother. She smells of lavender. Does time wash it all away? Does the rhythm of groceries, taxes, and grandchildren somehow erase complicity? Some tried to hide. Some tried to justify. Some even rewrote their stories for memoirs, casting themselves as naive or misunderstood. The phrase "we didn't know" became a post-war chorus. But you've read the documents. You've seen the letters. You know who typed the names, who signed the forms, who sent birthday cards to Himmler and stitched SS patches into their sons' coats. And here's the question that hums beneath it all. Can someone live a good life after doing nothing to stop evil? Is survival enough? Or is silence a lifelong sentence? You exit the village as church bells ring. The world turns. Children laugh. Gardens bloom. And yet, under every fresh lawn, history whispers. You follow a narrower path now. One lined not by rose bushes or ruins, but by memory, sharpened into something militant. This road leads you past the rubble of the Reich and straight into a drawing room in post-war West Germany, where a young woman named Gudrun Himmler stares proudly at a photo of her father. Yes, that Himmler. Heinrich Himmler, chief of the SA, orchestrator of the Holocaust. And to Gudrun, still just puppy, you settle in quietly beside her. She's in her 20s now, flipping through albums filled with crisp black and white photographs, her childhood in pressed dresses, her family vacations, her father in uniform petting a dog. The world sees Himmler as a monster. She sees him as misunderstood. Mainstream fact, Gudrun Himmler never renounced her father. In fact, she spent most of her life defending him. As she grew older, she became a key figure in Stille Hilfe, a secretive support network for former SS members and convicted war criminals. It provided legal aid, financial assistance, and even helped some Nazis escape prosecution. Your fringe tidbits. Gudrun attended the war crimes trials of Nazi officers and took notes like a student, not out of curiosity but loyalty. She believed these men were victims of Allied propaganda, not criminals. She sent them birthday cards in prison. She visited their graves. She saw herself not as a bystander to history but as a daughter of the Reich, preserving a legacy others tried to bury. You move through her apartment. There's no swastika in sight. She's careful about optics. But the bookshelf reveals more. Memoirs of Nazi officials, framed Reich insignia, coded references to Aryan heritage. She's fluent in dog whistles. Historians still argue whether Gudrun's activism was born from trauma, stubbornness, or delusion. But you don't need a degree to see this. She chose her path. She could have vanished into obscurity, changed her name, lived a quiet life. Instead, she chose to build a mythology of innocence around a mass murderer. You flip through a stack of her letters to aging SS men. She writes with warmth, respect, and in some cases, almost flirtation. She calls them loyal patriots. She signs off with phrases like, "with admiration from your faithful Gudrun." It's unsettling and very intentional. Her loyalty wasn't just personal, it was political. She denied the Holocaust through omission, implying that history had exaggerated things. When questioned, she'd say her father loved his country and was betrayed by bad influences. Never mind the documents. Never mind the ash. In the 1980s and 90s, Gudrun became a quiet icon for the neo-Nazi underground, not through rallies or violence, but through quiet reverence, familial authority, and a name that still carried fear. She never gave press interviews. She didn't need to. Her presence at memorials, funerals, and courtrooms said enough. You sit with her now on a small couch. as she sips tea from a cup painted with an Edelweiss, the flower of German mountain purity, often repurposed by right-wing groups. Her eyes are clear. Her voice is soft. She talks about truth, about honor, about revision, every word chosen like it's part of a code. She never married. Her life belonged to the cause being not just her father's legacy, but the refusal to let it die. She passed away in 2018. No public funeral, no official mourning, but within certain circles, her death was noted with reverence, a symbol of unbroken lineage, of belief carried like a torch through darkness. And you wonder, sitting there beside her ghost, can ideology be inherited? Is it possible to be born into evil without ever lifting a hand but still carry it forward with every breath? You leave the apartment, the door closing softly behind you. The hallway smells of dust and floral soap. Outside, the world seems brighter, but behind one window, a photo of a father in SS uniform still rests on a mantle, not hidden, not condemned. You enter the final corridor now, not a bunker, not a villa, not a schoolroom. It's less defined than any of those in in-between place, echoing with the questions left behind. Here, the lights dim low, and the footsteps of history soften into whispers. You've met the wives, the mistresses, the daughters, the secretaries, the girls in braids, and now, at last, you ask, what do we do with them? This is the reckoning, the moral maze, because not every woman you met killed, or tortured, or screamed speeches into microphones, but they all helped build something terrible. Whether through silence, support, or sheer belief, they were part of the engine, mainstream fact, of the thousands of women involved in the Nazi regime. Directly or indirectly, only a small fraction were ever prosecuted. Post-war justice was designed to punish the architects and the visible faces, the women behind the scenes. Those threading needles into uniforms and baking cakes for SS banquets often disappeared back into the crowd. You're sitting now in a courtroom, not Nuremberg, but a smaller trial in the late 1940s. A woman stands before a tribunal. She was a secretary at a concentration camp. She's accused of typing orders that led to death. She says she didn't know. The judge sighs. Her sentence is light. This is where your fringe detail surfaces. In 2022, a woman named Irmgard Furchner, aged 97, was convicted as an accessory to murder for her role as a teenage secretary at Stutthof concentration camp. She had fled her trial at first, yes, even with a walker, but was caught and eventually tried. The verdict, guilty. But the sentence, suspended. Historians still argue how to assess the culpability of these women. Was their participation ideological or practical? Were they driven by belief, survival, or social pressure? And more pressingly, does it matter? Because you've seen the letters, the loyalty, the laughter over poisoned soup. These weren't just passive observers. They were gears, not flashy ones, but necessary all the same. You revisit Magda Goebbels in the bunker, brushing her daughter's hair. You hear Emmy Goering's laughter in the opera box. You see Gudrun Himmler laying flowers on her father's grave. And suddenly, the roles blur. Were they victims? Some villains. Some... But most dangerously, they were both. It's easy to imagine evil as something loud, cruel, grotesque. But the truth is, sometimes it's quiet. Polished, wearing Chanel no. Thieves, speaking softly about duty and destiny while entire families are erased. You walk through the remnants of the regime now, through empty offices, deserted homes, broken statues. The women are gone, but their choices remain. In letters tucked in drawers, in silverware taken from vanished families, in the names they never spoke again. And you sit with the final question, heavy on your chest. How do we remember them? Do we forgive, forget, condemn, or do we whisper their names not in hatred, but in warning? Because these were not monsters. These were people educated, elegant, capable of love. And that, in the end, is what makes them so dangerous. Now the night quiets around you, the corridors close, the voices fade. You're lying still now, letting the weight of it settle not painfully, but gently, like a heavy blanket pulled up under your chin. The stories you've heard tonight weren't about war in the way it's usually told. There were no front lines, no tanks, just women, rooms, tea, secrets, and choices. You exhale slowly. The air feels softer now, touched with sleep. And though your mind may still be spinning between words like guilt and grace, you're not alone in that. People have wrestled with these same questions for decades. Historians, judges, daughters, even some of the women themselves. Maybe that's the lesson tonight. That history doesn't just live in books or museums. It lives in gestures, in decisions, in the quiet agreement between what we do and what we let happen. And maybe, just maybe, it's not about finding answers, but about never stopping the asking. So let yourself sink now. Let the world dim behind your eyes. The names, the faces, the footsteps, they'll wait. They always do. But for now, rest. You've carried enough of the past for one night. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.